I'm excited for this theme, and I'm excited about just walking through the Bible and telling all of these stories where we see God um, exercising his ability to restore people and to reform and to rename. And today's story is about God renaming somebody, and that person is Jacob. This story is really cool, and I like names. And in our family, we always have nicknames for everybody. That started with my brother Mike. Mike always came up with a nickname for people. My nickname was Stretch. He always picked names that were significant because usually it was a mocking name and it had something to do with a weakness in you. And so mine was Stretch because I was really tall and skinny. I grew way too quick and I wore sweatpants, and they were flutters. So they were just kind of hanging out there, and I always walked around shirtless with these sweatpants that were hiked up, so he started calling me Stretch. I wasn't particularly fond of the name, but it was descriptive of who I was. If you don't believe me, I couldn't find a picture with the sweatpants in it, unfortunately. This kind of cut it off a little bit, but I was in fact wearing sweatpants in this picture. And I was tall and skinny and rocking my boom box from the 80s. You guys remember this bad boy? I wish that I could find one of these online because I would totally get this same boom box again. But names are important. Names are important. And we're going to go back and look at this story where Jacob wrestles with God. And here's what I love about this story. Story never really stuck out in my mind until I heard my good friend Les Ferguson, who preaches at a Church of Christ down in Mississippi. He preached a sermon on Jacob wrestling with God, and in fact wrote a book recently called Still Wrestling. It's a story about Les wrestling with God, and as the name indicates, he's still wrestling with God to this day. On October 10th, 2011, Les's wife and son were both murdered by Les's son's abuser. It was on Les and his wife's 24th wedding anniversary that the double murders took place. Obviously, completely wrecked his life, just absolutely devastated Les. And in that moment, and in the aftermath of that, he was really trying to figure out who God was in the midst of this. Because our whole lives, right, we're taught that, man, God is just this wonderful God, and he showers all these blessings. And, and Les had been preaching for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden, this tragedy struck. And he's really trying to figure out who was God. And then he goes back and lands on this story with Jacob wrestling with God. And just to give a little bit of the backdrop, if you remember, Jacob, which means heel grabber or follower, somebody who deceives, another name is trickster. That's the name Jacob. Jacob was given that name because at birth, he was grabbing the heel of his twin brother Esau, who was the firstborn. And so Jacob's name was given to him as somebody who grabs the heel and follows and he's trying to get ahead. So if you know that story of Jacob, he ends up stealing the blessing. He tricked Esau into selling his birthright. He ends up, as the younger brother, getting the blessing that his older brother was supposed to get. And Esau isn't very happy about it, and they end up parting company. And for years and years and years, they lived these separate lives. And then all of a sudden, Jacob got word that Esau wanted to meet him. Well, you can imagine how his heart sank, because in his mind he was thinking, well, Esau probably wants revenge on me. So then he finds out on this journey, he's going out to meet his brother, and he finds out that Esau sends 400 soldiers to meet up with him before he gets to Esau. And so Jacob starts splitting his family up. And he's sending people different directions in case some of these people come and kill off family members. Jacob doesn't want them to all be in the same place because he doesn't want his whole family annihilated. That's what was going through his mind. And so he separates from his family. He sends them off in different directions, and Jacob is alone. He's on his way to meet Esau. He's about the age of 80, and this man shows up and just starts wrestling with him. And the way Les talks about this story, it's so cool because he says, Can you imagine an 80-year-old man just being strong enough to wrestle with another man all throughout the night? And by the way, Jacob was winning. He's wrestling with this man, and he doesn't know it's God, and he's wrestling, and I'm not really fond of this picture, because in this picture, Jacob looks like this ripped 20-year-old guy who's about to, shred anybody who gets in his path. I don't think that's what Jacob looked like. I think Jacob was probably fairly old and frail, and he's wrestling. And here's the story. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. If you remember how hard he fought to keep his family together, and he had 12 children, and his wife Rachel died, given childbirth. He just had a long life of struggle. And for the first time, he's left alone. And then this happens. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. That's a hardcore 80-year-old man. He's wrestling, he's fighting, he's winning, he's prevailing, and the guy who is God, Jacob would later find out, takes his finger, dislocates his hip. And Jacob, you would think, would have the sense to say, okay, I'm screaming and writhing in pain, I'm going to let you go. But not Jacob. He hangs on. And he's still wrestling. What's amazing about Jacob is that as wrong as he was throughout his life, Jacob always demanded blessing. He tricked Esau into selling his birthright. He took the blessing from his father, Isaac. As Isaac was dying, he took the blessing from him. Jacob wanted to be blessed. I don't think it's that Jacob was like, man, I just want a life of wealth and fame, and I want God to bless me. Like, he didn't think about blessing the way that we think about blessings. Jacob was faithful to God. Jacob struggled. He had a lot of struggles throughout his life. Jacob lost his spouse, whom he loved with all of his heart. Jacob's son Joseph, who was his favorite, was taken away from him. Joseph's other brothers tricked Jacob, said that Joseph was dead. They sold him into slavery. Joseph goes into Egypt. Jacob didn't know that until many, many years later. But Jacob lived a long life of struggles, and the one thing that I admire about Jacob is he demanded blessing. He wanted these blessings from God. So he's wrestling with this man. Verse 26, then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And my question is, how many times do we wrestle with God and we say to God, I will not let you go until you bless me? He fought and fought and fought for this blessing. I feel like so many times in my own life, so many times I'm walking with God or walking beside God or leaving God behind or whatever. I don't even think about this. And Jacob is wrestling and agonizing and is in extreme pain, thinking that he's going to meet his demise with his brother Esau. He's pretty sure this might be the last night of his life that he's alive. And the thing that blows my mind about this story, and that I had never heard anybody talk about before Les Ferguson mentioned it, is that God expressed his weakness. That's found throughout Scripture. I never heard that before. The weakness of God. I had never heard that before. But it's there. And Les said God expresses his weakness by exercising restraint. When we wrestle with God, God allows us to win. He gives us the upper hand. In his restraint, he allowed his son to die on the cross. We sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free. He could have, but he didn't. The weakness of God exercises restraint. I wonder how many times we wrestle with God and we just give up. We just walk away. I see so many people who leave the faith because they wrestle with God and they're told by other Christians, no. You don't question God. You don't, you certainly don't weep in front of God. You be powerful. How many people have heard that at funerals? I've got to be strong for my family. Says who? I've got to hold it together. I've got to be strong for my kids. I can't let them see that, as a Christian, that I have moments where I just fall apart. Why not? God is a God of revival. God takes that which is broken and weak and poor and sick and hungry, and God revives it. God revives us. He breathes new life into people, and this story is no different. Jacob was a broken man who wrestled with God, and God allowed Jacob to win. He allowed Jacob to prevail, and Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? Now, we miss this in the English because in the English we read it Jacob. Or in Hebrew, you read it as Jacob. But Jacob means trickster, heel grabber, follower. What is your name? I'm the deceiver. My name is heel grabber. And then he said, your name shall no longer be heel grabber or follower or trickster, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Israel means to contend with God, to fight, to wrestle, to really put a stronghold on somebody. You have striven with God and with man. Well, does that fit his personality? Absolutely. He was striven with God and man when he grabbed the heel of his brother. When he took the birthright, he was constantly trying to get this blessing. And God didn't denounce him for it. He rewarded him for it. Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you asked my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose up on him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Isn't that a cool story? Isn't that powerful? So many of us refrain from wrestling, and we're like, no, I just have to have more faith. I just need to put more faith in God, and then I'll feel better about myself. I'll feel better about my life. When somebody dies, somebody who we're really close to, right? We've all lost loved ones in our lives. There's rarely ever another feeling that just rips your heart out and throws it on the floor like the death of a loved one. It's absolutely devastating. And I feel like we've been so programmed to say, just be strong a little bit longer. Just hold it together because that's what good Christians do. Just strap on a smile. Don't talk about it at work. Don't talk about it with your friends. Don't talk about it with your Christian family. Just push it down and move on because that's what Christians are supposed to do. And I read this story and I'm like, no. We are meant to wrestle with God. This is such a cool story. God showed up when Jacob was at a low point, and God wrestled with him. God allowed Jacob to prevail. God even injured him in the process. They got so metaphorical about our journey with God, right? Because so many times we're just plugging along. We're like, yeah, God, I'm going to breathe him in and breathe the devil out, like all this weird, bizarre stuff. And you're like, no, like when we walk with God, we wrestle with God. And when we wrestle with God, we get hurt sometimes. We get injured. And in the end, God allows us to feel that pain. He allows us to feel the pain in our lives. God does that because God is a God of revival. Charles brought up in class about Jacob, something I'd never thought of before. He said, what do you think the emotions were that Jacob was feeling when after all those years thought his son Joseph was dead, and then finds out that his other sons tricked him and that Joseph was alive and well and was second in command to the king of Egypt? So I can't even imagine what emotions he was feeling. They were probably all over the place. This extreme high, this extreme low, and everything in between. I can't even begin to imagine. But God allows us to limp toward him and to wrestle with him because God's a God of revival. Jacob ended his life on an incredibly high note because he demanded blessing from God, and God gave it. Don't hold back. Don't be afraid to wrestle with God. I feel like so many times we play it safe. We play it safe in our lives. We play it safe with church. We play it safe in so many fields, and we're like, okay, we got to just plug along and just set the cruise control and kind of don't rock the boat, keep things going, keep them steady. Eventually we'll run out of gas, and then we'll enter into heaven, right? Like we have this view, and that's not the God we serve. The God we serve says, go out and find people and reach into their lives and bless them. And you might find me along the way, and we might have a little wrestle match, but in the end, I'm going to bless you. You might be limping, but in the end, you're going to keep on walking. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to be with you. It's the God we serve. And it's exciting, and it's cool. This morning, I'm going to ask if there's anybody who has not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or anybody who has any prayer needs. I'm going to be leading singing, so our shepherds will be in the back. You can go back and see them, and we would invite you and encourage you to go sit with them, talk with them, put Christ on in baptism if you've not done that. We invite you to do that as we all stand and sing together.